Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Real Turkey channel. This is your presenter Atilla Yeşilada, broadcasting at a very early hour in Istanbul. It's like 1 a.m. here, but I am sleepless. Most of Turkey are sleepless because economic conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Everybody's thinking about how to make ends meet. Moreover, we have presidential and general elections coming up in less than a year, and these are sort of like existential elections. If President Erdogan and his AKP MHP coalition win, Turkey will go to hell in a handbasket. But this raises a very important question which vexes all the Turks and Turkish observers abroad, which is, can the opposition rescue the Turkish economy after the mess Mr. Erdogan made? This is the topic of this video, which also has received a few requests in the comments. And the situation is simple. Turkish economy is truly in a deep mess. Just to cite a couple of data points, official inflation is 80%. Devaluation, that's the loss of value in Turkish lira versus the American dollar, is 50% over the last 10 months or so. And broad-based unemployment is 20%. It's certainly not going to improve, and I'll show you why not, because Friday night at midnight, Moody has just downgraded the sovereign. It is important to take a look at its statement. By the way, this is from Moody's website. Turkey's credit grade is now at the lowest rank of B. C and below means default probabilities are rising rapidly. Essentially, the problem is, from Moody's perspective, is that Turkey has a hard currency shortage, which is the balance of payments financing is at risk. Moreover, what the Erdogan government does is highly unusual or unorthodox, meaning that the consistent stream of measures being rolled out every day are very unlikely to improve the conditions in the Turkish economy. Now, of course, these kind of, just a second, let me find myself here. Of course, this kind of poor management reflects to all sorts of areas of the society. In addition to statistics I cited, we are also having to deal with moderate but rising labor unrest. Here is another cutoff from World Socialist website, which says a new wave of strikes erupts in Turkey as inflation surges. I would encourage you to read the second paragraph, which says 90% of the population now below the poverty line. Uh, Turkish Consumers Association and Turkish, the major labor federation, are reliable sources, but I think there are measurement errors here. But I would fairly say, based on other pieces of data, that up to 50% of Turkish population may have lost relative stature or position in the economy over the last 12 months. So this 50% is consuming less, earning less, is having a hard time to meet its credit card balances, which also means that the other 50% has got richer, which is a very unpleasant situation if you live in a developing economy. So let's get back to our topic. Let's say Mr. Erdogan and his parliamentary alliance, AKP and MHP, have lost in the next elections. Can the opposition do a better job? Can they rescue the economy? The answer is a nuanced yes. It depends on what kind of problems you are talking about. Just a second, let me lower the headspace here. If we're solely focused on the three pieces of data I mentioned at the beginning, which is high inflation, chronically weak currency, and rising unemployment, yeah, these are fairly easy to deal with. And I say so because I religiously read both the statements from the party leaders of the main opposition alliance, as well as going to their websites to check out what the heck they're going to be doing if and when they come to power. But if we're talking about problems in the context of rule of law, Turkey's, you know, declining institutions, the deviation from free market rules, issues on which there is no societal consensus, such as improving the quality of the education system, because obviously we need better trained workers to work alongside AI and new technologies. I'm not so sure. It's a very daunting challenge that Mr. Erdogan is going to leave us with after 20 years of just wrecking Turkey with a wrecking ball year after year. So I'm just going to focus on the first 2 years, simply crossing my fingers that the opposition will stay in power at the end of these 2 years, and with a little bit help from the global backdrop, may even do better in the coming years. So, what can the opposition to improve the lot of the Turkish economy, and how can it be simple if it took Erdogan at least 5 years to bring the Turkish economy down to its knees? Simple. And what I'm going to show you next is directly copied from the joint statements of these six parties. I also shot a video about a historic um, declaration for democratization, which is worth a watch. Okay, so from what I gathered, both from the joint statements of the opposition parties as well as from individual statements which seem to reflect the opinion of those two parties, to improve the economy, it will pursue a five-step restoration process. A, bring back democracy. B, independent monetary policy. 3, returning to rule of law. 4, transparency in public tenders, and of course, increasing social spending to deal with rising poverty. Now, let's go over these to explain what it means. Institutional economics has largely focused on the role of the democracy in terms of faster economic and societal development, even though I wouldn't call it a consensus. The likes of Daron Acemoğlu um, and Jared Diamond seem to suggest that a fully democratic society is better able to deal with the challenges of the complex world and to deliver a better results in terms of economic development. Turkey has lost most of its democratic credentials. I am sorry. In fact, it's called a hybrid regime where the authoritarian elements, that's one man rule by Mr. Erdogan, mostly dominate the political landscape, and all Turkey is left with to call democracy is free but not so fair elections. If the new government can turn this around and bring Turkey back to the path of democratic restoration, it will increase confidence. It will increase the efficiency of the institutions such as the free market and the judiciary and the contract law. Can they do it? Yes, they can. I think these parties have all suffered from Mr. Erdogan's authoritarian tendencies, and they have a genuine interest to return Turkey to the first decade of 2000's 21st century, when Turkey was a candidate to become an EU member, and the whole accession process, that's adopting EU rules and norms, have delivered not only prosperity but massive improvements in terms of institutional quality, human rights, etc., etc. The second thing, which is directly related to economic performance, of course, the independence of the central bank. Currently, central bank is just an employee of Mr. Erdogan, and it pursues insane policies. Usually, I have done so many videos about what the central bank does wrong. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but this is the gist of the matter. If you have a country that has 80% inflation and accelerating, you have the central bank employ very tight monetary policy with policy rates gradually being raised to 80% and above to depress domestic demand. What's the policy rate in Turkey? 14%. So, an independent monetary policy would do the work in terms of reducing inflation and strengthening the lira. Returning to rule of law, that's also an important thing. Modern capitalist societies are based on property rights, on the sanctity of contracts, uh, because otherwise they will simply not function. And Turkey has deviated so much from the rule of law. These are obviously not my personal views. You can look at Amnesty International website. You can look at what the EU seems to be saying about Turkey, as well as United States State Department Human Rights Developments, the annual report. Returning to the law would be simple. It would be simple in terms of signaling to our diplomatic counterparts and to the markets by doing a couple of simple things. For instance, changing the composition of High Commission of prosecutors and judges, where currently the Justice Minister and his Undersecretary are members. This is called, you know, political interference in judiciary, and by removing these people, which is also the recommendation of the EU, the new administration can send a very strong signal that it shall abide by the letter and the spirit of the rule of law. Other things that can immediately improve confidence, on which I've shot videos as well, is to release Turkey's two notorious um, or world famous political prisoners, the human rights campaigner Mr. Osman Kavala and the leader of the Kurdish equality movement, Mr. Selahattin Demirtas. The fourth item is transparency in public tenders. That's very important. Turkey has become a crony regime. The, the state spends a lot of money both at federal and regional and municipal levels on infrastructure, uh, projects, as well as buying goods and services for its own needs. All of these ought to be done by transparent tenders so that the cheapest and most qualified offer will be accepted. That rule has been dispensed in Turkey, not only at the federal level, but even in the smallest municipalities. All tenders go to Mr. Erdogan's cronies and to members of the AK Party. Obviously, this creates tremendous inefficiency, costs a lot to the budget, and most importantly, nobody wants to invest in Turkey simply because every business have to confront the government at some process, such as in licensing, concessions, etc., and they know they are not going to get a fair treatment unless they're a card carrying member of AKP. And of course, enacting these changes is never simple. Turkey needs to implement a comprehensive and well thought out austerity or belt tightening program, probably with IMF support, but not necessary. Just IMF guidance or cooperation will suffice. And look, I'm a capitalist, but I'll be the first to admit this belt tightening programs hurt the poor. And what do you do about that? You increase social spending until the economy exits the recession and starts growth again, which through the trickle down process generates prosperity for most of the public. Okay? These are the basic rules. Easy to say. Every politician promises these. There is nothing, you know, controversial here. The question is, how does the scheme actually work? And here I have outlined the recipe for success for the opposition alliance. The first step, obviously, is, and it's not, on this table, the first step is to signal commitment to orthodox policies, to democracy and rule of law. Obviously, that's not that simple, but fortunately, Mr. Erdogan is leaving behind such a sad legacy of authoritarianism, arbitrary behavior, and insane decisions that I think just a few statements which sound rational by the new government would do it. Moreover, it will be a new government, but it's all old hands, old school thinkers, all the way from CHP and EYP leaders Kılıçdaroğlu to Meral Akşener to potential candidates to run the economy, such as former economists Ali Babajan, former undersecretaries of Treasury, well known mainstream economists, former top level bankers. All of these people have already spoken to the public to express what they intend to do. And let me just summarize this in a very brief nutshell. They are going to be as orthodox as plain vanilla, which means this government will commit itself to a standard, well understood, and internationally accepted IMF style austerity program and will live with it. And it has the human power or the woman power to execute such a program uh, quite correctly, quite properly. As I've said, Faik Öztrak from CHP was on the wheel during Turkey's relatively successful IMF standby during the tenure of former Prime Minister Ecevit at the turn of the century. Ibrahim Çanakçı, another Undersecretary of Treasury, was there for a long time. Ali Babacan presided over the golden years of Turkish economy. Every party um, has been joined by, global economists of Turkish origin who want to dedicate themselves to the democratization of Turkish economy. So, that part is easy. The second part is to appoint a respectable name to run the central bank of Turkey. That's also easy. I mean, anybody can do the job, really. Then central bank raises interest rates. A new rule of law-based regime signaled. When you raise interest rates, obviously, just like Fed, European Central Bank, and almost all the developing nations are doing at that point, Turkish lira becomes more attractive. That brings in foreign money. That increases the foreign exchange reserves of the central bank and it reverses dollarization. That's the process of domestic savers preferring hard currency over their own currencies. And that's really just, a virtuous cycle, simply because as you raise interest rates, the Turkish lira appreciates. The appreciation of the Turkish lira brings in more foreign money, which causes a second round of appreciation in the currency. Moreover, knowing that the value of the Turkish lira will be stable or higher vis-a-vis the dollar in the short term, a lot of domestics sell their FX savings and switch to Turkish lira, which accelerates the process. Because of these factors, also inflation decelerates slowly. It's not going to happen immediately, but a commitment to tight monetary and fiscal policies, as well as a comprehensive austerity program, will probably eliminate most of the inflation, which seems to be driven not by input costs or great demand, but from deteriorating expectations. In other words, inflation has become sticky, and to re anchor inflationary expectations, all you need to do is to show some credibility and perseverance with tight monetary and fiscal policies. And as I've said, this becomes a virtuous cycle that is, you know, tight monetary policy feeding into stronger lira, feeding into lower inflation, which raises economic confidence, which raises the confidence of foreign investors or foreign companies to invest into Turkey. People at home feel better. They sell their dollars um, and switch to Turkish currency. Businesses invest more into fixed assets, and it goes round and round and round. But of course, such measures are not free of charge. Nothing in economics is free of charge. The cost will be a moderate recession. If you cut budget spending, which sort of reduces the amount of income the state pumps into the economy, and on top of that, raise interest rates so that credit cards become more expensive, housing becomes more expensive, cars become more expensive, people consume less, and you have a typical Keynesian recession driven by inadequate demand. That's a recession. Can it be moderate? Yeah, I mean, Turkey's experiment with the 2000 IMF program shows that a recession be, s- can be over in as little as 12 to 18 months. Of course, even that is going to be a huge deal for the rookie opposition administration because they will come to power with the promise of immediately alleviating poverty and inflation, and they will have to explain to a skeptical public that this will cost them even more in terms of economic welfare. But if during the recession social spending for the most fragile segments of the population can be increased, then social unrest and voter discontent will be kept at a low level, and the government will essentially buy time for the hard part of the austerity program to be over and ride to more popularity on the back of the good part of the austerity program, which is faster growth with lower inflation and current account deficits. Um, where will they find the funds? I mean, hey, it's great to increase social spending, but if you do it by more taxes, it kind of defeats the purpose. And if you do it by printing money, which is no longer done in developed nations, but in Turkey it is done, then you cause more inflation. But the new government will have two advantages. A, there is a lot of waste in the budget. As I've said, remember at the beginning of the video that all the public tenders, public procurement goes to AKP's cronies, and obviously they charge very high prices. So simply by making the public procurement process more efficient, by cutting useless state infrastructure for a year, I believe the new government can find sources equivalent to roughly 2% of the GDP, or roughly $15 billion, which can be spent on social spending without upsetting the delicate equilibrium I mentioned between social spending and higher inflation. To recall, $15 would be roughly two times or, or even more than AKP had spent to alleviate temporary unemployment during the peak days of the pandemic. They have spent very little. Instead, they simply gave tax breaks and, y- you know, um, extended unemployment benefits, which is simply I'm sorry, not extend unemployment benefits, but cheap loans to those who are no longer employed, which is not the same thing. You are simply helping these people raise their incomes during pandemic, but then they'll have to pay for it, and the economy is back to where it was. So I think it can be done. I think in 2023, when the global backdrop for Turkey becomes the worst in decades, the inflow of foreign investment will alleviate most of the damage. In 2024, of course, Fed would probably stop tight monetary policy, might even moderate monetary policy somewhat. In other words, global backdrop will work to the advantage of the new government. I think everybody expects lower commodity prices and energy prices by then. So if this new government can survive the first year without loss of popularity and with increased credibility, the chances increase that they can complete this transformation from insane economic policies to orthodox economic management in the second year with some help from, you know, global liquidity conditions. But this is not the only problem. I mean, human capacity and quality, not only in civil service, but in the judiciary and regulatory institutions, have declined substantially. It will take years to retire those who have simply been political appointments and to bring in qualified people. To restore our broken diplomatic relations with the West, which would also increase the confidence of foreign investors to send more money to Turkey. It will take at least a decade to improve the education system so that Turkey can raise young people qualified with the skills that the global marketplace and the new technologies demand to be productive. There are other issues which bear on economic performance, such as blatant discrimination against the Kurds, Turkey's Muslim religious minority, Alawites, women, LGBTQ. If you discriminate against these people, they are much less willing to join the workforce and to be more productive. Whether a new administration can solve these problems is a big question mark. From the statements they say somewhere here and there, I think they stand a good chance, or at least their hearts are in the right place. But whether they can find the societal support and whether fate will help them is a matter of big question. But I think if they do well, as I predict in this video, in the first 2 years of their administration, they will have both higher public support, international credibility, and of course the experience to tackle with more difficult problems. Thank you very much. Our traffic is very low. It could increase, I suppose, as I understand from other YouTube influencers. If you push the like button or subscribe or share, I don't know. Uh, but our comments section is really just outlandish. I think the last video got something like 80 comments compared to a traffic of 3,000, which I think is an excellent ratio. So if you like the channel, if you want me to continue doing this, please, like, write a comment or two. I try to answer all of them. This has been a fairly long video at about 26 minutes, but it was a complicated subject. I will soon shoot a video to explain Mr. Erdogan's hunt for money to win the elections and answer the question, can he really do it? This is another broadcast of Real Turkey channel presented by Atilla Eşlada, who's saying goodbye from Istanbul.